Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Signal Hour. I am going to find the signal within the signal. Of course, the signal now is X. Mainstream media dying on the vine, and good riddance. Couldn't happen to a worse bunch of people. They have been absolutely doing us all a disservice, but mostly themselves, obviously, as they do things that fundamentally work against their own best interests. You would have thought at some point in time, media would have figured out that their own jobs would have triggered some sense of self-preservation potentially. So it's interesting to watch how badly they have failed us over time. So we're doing our best to create the signal within the signal. It's exciting times these days. There's a chance we can return, obviously, to common sense and to things making sense again. If I was going to wear an election hat this year, bright red, it would have said, make things make sense again. That's what I'm after here. Can we just make sense of things again using some common sense? So today I want to talk about a few things. But first, I want to talk about this, which is LA City has decided to become a sanctuary city. Let's listen into what the rationale here is for this. Give me 1 second. I'm going to have to bring up this and bring this
of mass deportations.
There we go.
Here's Council Member Paul Krikorian.
That by enacting this ordinance, by the continuing practices that we've been engaged in the city for 45 years, we are actually keeping Angelenos safer. That has to be a part of the story of what we're doing. We're not only just keeping immigrant communities safer, we're keeping all of us safer by enacting this ordinance.
But members of the Trump administration have already said they are moving forward with their plans for mass deportations no matter what. Trump's appointed border czar said today if cities don't want to help them, then they should get out of the way. The border czar, Tom Homan, said if they need to send twice as many resources to a city to stick to their plan, then that is what.
All right. Let's go back through this very quickly because what they're talking about here, he said, the city councilor guy said that somehow becoming a sanctuary city makes everyone safer. This is a talking point. Here's the rest of that talking point again.
Following Trump's victory, LA Mayor Karen Bass is calling for swift action to protect immigrant communities. On day one, Trump has vowed to start deporting millions of undocumented immigrants. Bass tonight issuing this statement: I stand with the people of this city. Immigrant protections make our communities stronger and our city better.
All right, so this is pretty standard what we see and what we've had to put up with for the past 4 years, but even longer, is this idea that if you just keep repeating something, somehow it becomes true. So obviously they have their talking point, which is that somehow immigrant protections make our communities stronger. Is that actually the case? Now, here's the problem. This is the other thing that we've been facing the whole way through, is that we can't actually have words have meaning. This is one of the things they stripped away. Remember during COVID? What's a herd immunity? We don't know anymore. What's a vaccine? Let's redefine that. What's a case? What's an infection? They took all our words away and scrambled all the meaning up. And they do this all the time. And by they, I mean the blob, the DC architecture, the people who want to get something done, but they don't want to persuade you with actual logic and common sense because they might fail at that. So what they do is they muddy the waters, they change the words, they make these things unknowable anymore. So let's go there because, I'm not an expert or anything, but I did go with Michael Yon and Brett Weinstein. We went down to the Darien Gap. I got in a canoe. We went 4 hours up a river and got to see for myself exactly what we mean when we're talking about the people who are coming into the country illegally. And so now it's time for a definition. It's not immigrants. It's migrants. This is one word we're going to have to reclaim for ourselves. And I'm watching this happen. Be careful as you watch out, trying to get the signal from the news out there that they are constantly missing and messing and squishing this all together, right? Immigrants versus migrants. Now, right here, Amy Pope, who is the head of IOM, that's the UN agency on migration, said back in January of this year, thanks to all these people, how migrants are a force for good, fueling economic growth and driving prosperity. So that's the language they're going forward with. It's somehow migrants, but at least she used the word correctly. A migrant, somebody who's coming from one area, typically a poor, resource poor, economically poor area, coming into a different area. She says it's a force for good because in their model, You take somebody from a poor area, you move them into a rich area, and then they send resources from the rich area back to the poor area. So it makes the rich area a little poorer and the poor area a little richer. And that's actually the goal. This is the great leveling. They wanted to use migration as a force for social, well, it's social engineering. This is immigration. Okay. If you want to become an immigrant in the United States, it is a 70-box, 5-year minimum process. It's got tests. It's got vetting. It is very elaborate. It is not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. And people step through it all the time, including my grandparents. I am a fan of immigration, just like I'm a fan, if I was a landlord, of being able to select who I rented my house to. Might run a credit check, might run a criminal check, might run a reference check, might run a job check, just to make sure that the people I am inviting into my house to help me maintain that asset are the right kind of people in there. This is normal. Businesses hire, landlords rent, and countries immigrate. But it's a very elaborate process, as it should be. So they're trying to take all of that away. This, on the other hand, is migration. This is what happens when a lot of undocumented, unvetted people go from one area to the other. The word migration comes from, it's a biological term, and it just means seasonal movement of animals from one region to another, or a movement of one part of something to another. Animals migrate because of resources. You go north, that's where the insects are, so you can have a successful breeding cycle. So migration is the mass movement of people. These are not the same thing. People in LA, unfortunately, seem to not know that these are distinct terms. Immigration versus migration. All right, I'm a little pedantic about this, but words matter. Let's use them correctly. Migration is not immigration. So here's the response of the incoming border czar Homan to this whole concept of migration protection in LA.
Real quickly, what happens to a mayor or a local police department chief that is under Democratic leadership that obstructs ICE in your federal agents that are helping get these deportations? What happens to them?
Well, first of all, if they don't want to help us get the hell out of the way, we're going to do it. If I got to send twice the amount of resources to that city, that's what we're going to do. If they would give us access to the jail, that would mean less agents in the community. For them pushing back and not letting us in the jail, it just means more agents are going to be in the community, so they're hurting themselves. Finally, I'll say this. They need to educate themselves. They need to review this. Title 8, United States Code 1324, III. Read about that and don't cross that line, because it is a felony to harbor and conceal an illegal alien from ICE. Read the statute, don't cross that line.
That's a warning from Tom Homan right there.
All right, well, that's pretty clear, isn't it? That we have laws on the books. If you don't like the laws, then you change the laws. That's actually how a nation is supposed to be run. And obviously we've had since, well, I don't know how long now, we've had the opposite of that, where people just sort of make it up as they go along. Remember, the Biden administration decided that they were going to give student loan relief to students. And then they did, and it got run up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, you can't do that. It's unconstitutional. So they did more of it. So we've actually entered this lawless area for a little while now. And it's not a good place to be, because for a country to have cohesion, you have to have both the appearance of as well as the reality of fairness of the law. If the president's just sort of ignoring all the laws, then, even when the Supreme Court rules, obviously a corrosive situation. Now, we've been facing this lawfare for quite a while now. And this is actually brings us to the part of this. I'm very excited for this part of the show, because this is something that's going to have to get corrected. We live in an environment now where it's entirely possible that we could undo a lot of this lawfare. So what does lawfare look like? Well, lawfare is like warfare. It's a term. The definition of this is using the legal machinery for political ends. And in many cases, the Democrats used the process of lawfare, where the process is the punishment. They know they're not going to get you in jail. They're just going to extract something from you, maybe years of your life, millions of dollars, lawyer fees, aggravation. And they're going to use this in a way to hold it out there to other people, to show other people, if you cross us, we're going to be mean and petty and vindictive. And that's hopefully going to have a chilling effect on anybody else who might think, I'm going to do the brave thing here, stand up. I don't think there was any more elaborately gross, immediately fully disqualifying exemplar of this than Senator Kamala Harris here, then a presidential candidate, excitedly talking about how she used lawfare.
I learned that with the swipe of my pen, I could charge someone with the lowest level offense. And because of the swipe of my pen, that person could be arrested. They could sit in jail for at least 48 hours. They could lose time from work and their family maybe lose their job. They'd have to come out of their own pocket to help hire a lawyer. They'd lose standing in their community. All because of the swipe of my pen. Weeks later, I could dismiss the charges, but their life would forever be changed. So I learned at a very young age the power.
Sorry to subject you to that. It's honestly hard for me to listen to that. The glee, you can feel it, right? That's probably about as authentic as I've ever heard Kamala be, where she's authentically excited at the power of using the stroke of a pen to destroy people's lives. And it didn't even matter in this case. She didn't say they've done something horrible, and of course we're going to have a penalty because society is organized and this is how we keep society safe. She said, no, just because I don't like somebody, I just stroke of a pen, 48 hours in jail, life upended. They're going to have to, and she's doing it with glee. To me, this is the definition. This is the full caricature of what lawfare actually looks like. So now we're going to turn to this part of the program. We're going to be talking about a particularly egregious case of lawfare that is on the books right now. This is something that is going through, and we're going to be advocating for a presidential pardon. And to help us talk about all this is Tracy Thurman. Hey, so good to have you here.
So good to be back here with you, Chris.
Oh, yeah. So first off, what's your reaction to that video of Kamala?
I have to swallow my vomit every time I hear it. And I've heard it a few times, and it gets me every time. I mean, the level of glee and satisfaction that some people get from power over other people and destroying other people's lives, it's just not something I can relate to, but it certainly is present in many of the officials in this country.
Well, it is, and it got epidemic, if not endemic, and we're going to have to root this out now. And so there are many, many examples of this right now. In fact, take a look at this. We'll go past this. So right now we have a list now of over 400 targeted Republicans, right? And you have to sort of cluster them by states. And it's not just, 400 Republicans. Who is this? I mean, look, former presidents, chiefs of staff, deans of law schools, DOJ officials, state senators. We have all sorts of state senators, campaign aides. These are just attorney generals, former and existing attorney generals who are under lawfare attack right now, mostly due to Project 65, which is a George Soros thing, which is a separate issue all on its own, right? But it goes beyond that. We saw Tucker and Bongino getting booted from Fox, Alex Jones owing $1 billion for an InfoWars going to be disbanded, Rudy Giuliani over $100 million for defamation of two people. And by the way, defamation is supposed to be for actual and potential future damages. There's not a chance in the world the people he defamed were
suffered
worth that
any
much.
damages. No,
Suffered
that level.
Right? Bannon, Navarro, the CFO of Epoch Times, James O'Keefe, on and on and on. So this is how these people have rolled.
Yes.
And it's fair to say, right, that this is a thing.
Yes. Lawfare is increasingly an issue in this country, and they're coming for the rich and powerful. They're coming for elected officials. But I can promise you, if we don't stand up for the people they're coming for now, they're coming for the rest of us too.
Yeah, well, indeed they are. So let's get your reaction. Let's do this because I want to. The case we're going to talk about today is Roger Ver.
Yes.
And we'll get into the particulars of the case in just a second. Here is a video that just came out. Who put this together?
A gentleman named Dan Motz with Goulash Media. He's a wonderful guy. He's done some great films in the past, and I'd seen some of his work, and I said, Dan, I have a project for you. This is an incredibly complicated story.
Yeah.
But please tell it for me. And Dan did an amazing job.
All right, this is it's amazing and also a very disturbing case.
Yes.
I want to tell you about my own story about being tortured in federal prison in the United States.
Roger Ver, unfortunately, today he got arrested.
Free Roger. Free Roger. The real reason that I actually went to prison is because I was busy saying things like the things that I'm going to say in this video. Taxation is theft and war is mass murder, funded by theft.
Roger, Bitcoin Jesus himself, was a true pioneer.
Here you've got one of the most independent people in the world preaching and teaching people to individually empower themselves around the globe.
He's been very supportive of the work we do.
He's also an inspiration to a lot of people around the globe.
I couldn't express any more of how great of a person he was.
In 2014, Roger Ver left the United States. America apparently is the land of the free. You should be free to just leave.
The United States government considers you to be their property.
Roger paid millions of dollars to the United States government, and they're saying now that it's not enough.
You read the quotes from his lawyer, it's like, this is the evidence of someone trying to comply with the law.
He did everything according to the book.
Nobody's ever gone to jail for that, ever.
The DOJ is actually using the Bitcoin Jesus term. They're literally going to crucify Bitcoin Jesus.
Just because some people get together and write down words on a piece of paper and call it a law, that doesn't alter morality one bit.
They're using the Trump case as a template for how they can go after any dissident.
This is very scary, frankly. 10 years later.
Government and central banks do not want this story out there.
The truth doesn't bend to whether or not we like it being the truth or not.
Roger's a good guy, and we all owe him a lot. It's really sad.
To say that he is instrumental in Bitcoin would be a radical understatement.
He's really believed in Bitcoin for the reasons that people should believe in Bitcoin.
It disgusts me from my core when I see government murdering people around the world. And Bitcoin has the power to undermine everything they're doing to people around the world.
Is it a coincidence? The only guy that's ever been criminally prosecuted on an exit tax interpretation is the guy that was exposing the intelligence community's attempts to infiltrate the Bitcoin movement.
There's nothing we can do to change the past, but we can work together to change the future.
From this moment forward, I'm on the same side as Roger.
Free Roger. Free Roger.
Free Roger.
It's as crazy a case as you can possibly imagine.
The craziest kid. Wow, that's really powerful. So, Tracy, take a start at the beginning. What is this case about? Who is Roger Ver and what's he facing?
This case goes back, believe it or not, 24 years. If you want to go back to the beginning of the lawfare against Roger Ver, you have to go back to the year 2000.
Okay.
So he was 21 years old. He's living in Silicon Valley where he grew up. And by this point, Roger was already a libertarian, very entrepreneurial minded, but he cared deeply about freedom. He cared deeply about human rights. And he was very disturbed by the US government infringing on those rights, but worse than infringing on those rights, hurting people here, hurting people around the globe. And so when he was running for office, even though it was simply for a local office there in California, in the debate that he had with the Republican and the Democrat, he brought up what the ATF did in Waco, Texas.
The ATF.
Yes, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, as you know, my favorite agency.
Hold on. So this is a 20-year-old kid. He's just on a debate stage, as people do. Libertarian candidate.
Yeah. At
a dais during a debate, says some words. What'd he say?
Well, he from the best of my memory, what he said was that the ATF are jackbooted, child murdering thugs.
Okay, well, there you go. Has an opinion. Are
Yes,
opinions illegal in this country?
You know, last I checked on the books, they were not. But man, has our country been acting recently like opinions are completely illegal and something you should be punished for.
Okay. All right. So he says these words, then what?
Well, it turns out that the ATF seems to have decided that it was time for a Stalin-esque campaign against him. You know, we all know the famous words, "Show me the man, I'll find you the crime." And at this point, the ATF decided Roger was the man and it was time to find the crime.
Okay. So what crime was that?
Selling fireworks on eBay.
Ooh, that's
death penalty offense, isn't it, Chris?
I mean, yeah, it doesn't get a lot worse than that.
No, I mean, if you're going to focus tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars on solving the criminal problem here in the United States, obviously, starting with firework sales on eBay, that's where you should start.
Okay, so he's a 20-year-old kid? 21
years old, I think.
21 years old.
And maybe he had started selling these when he was 20. It was a standard classic retail arbitrage. He'd buy them from the Cabela's catalog, and then he'd resell them on eBay for more. I don't know how many friends I have who have done this type of business on eBay. And at that time, that was entirely legal. There was, like I said, a guns and ammo section on eBay. Yep. Remember those days when there was freedom and you could do things like sell fireworks and see things like the words guns and ammo on eBay?
I probably shouldn't say this live on air, but most of my childhood was a felony. I'm not kidding. I used to walk down to, like when I was a kid, this was legal. I would walk down to the local hardware store and they had a little rack of what they were called testers, chemicals. And I could buy things. I could buy bottles of magnesium and also sulfur and charcoal and saltpeter. And I did things with those that today, I'm not kidding, are felonies. Back then it was legal.
Well, it's good that you didn't criticize the ATF while you did it, because if you had, apparently you would have been a target.
Mm-hmm.
So the ATF attempted to entrap him. They sent somebody to try to buy them off him. I think by this point he had actually quit selling them, but they knew he had.
Yep.
And so repeatedly, over and over again, this person's trying to buy them. And eventually Roger just said, look, I'm kind of tired of being harassed. I may have a few extra. I'll give them to you, but I don't want to be paid for them.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that sense you eventually develop for spotting a Fed. When you give them something and they're trying to insist on paying you for it, that's a sign.
Mm-hmm.
But so he gave them away. And then later he was, they charged him for this. Now, the context here you've got to get is, was Roger the only person selling these on eBay? No. And of course, he was far from the only person selling them. For God's sake, Cabela's was selling them.
Mm-hmm.
So hundreds of people are selling these fireworks. Nobody has a license because nobody thinks they need a license. I mean, obviously, I'm a bit of a, I'm a bit of a constitutionalist. I'm a little bit of a free market person, but I don't think anybody should need a license for this. But if your argument is that they do, you should need every single person doing this should need a license.
Right.
Not just one man, and not just by coincidence, the one man who happens to have criticized the agency responsible for these licenses.
Yeah. Now, I'm hazy on this. 20 years ago. Is that Clinton?
This is the beginning of the Bush administration.
Beginning of the Bush administration.
And it may have started, no, it may have started under, right at the end of the Clinton administration, depending on when it was in the year 2000. But the prosecution came under the Bush administration. And it's worth noting as well that Roger was an outspoken opponent of the wars.
Me too.
Yeah, me too.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was not beloved by these organizations. So after he's been charged, in case there's any doubt for anyone as to whether this was remotely politically motivated, there's a meeting between Roger's attorney, Roger, the prosecutor, and the ATF agent. And Roger's attorney is basically saying, look, this is at best a low-level offense. Mm-hmm. Tell the guy to get a license. Maybe you give him a fine. But there's hundreds of other people selling these things. Cabela's selling them. Cabela's. Are you going after Cabela's? And and the prosecutor seems to be seeing the point. The ATF agent's response is to pound his fist on the table and say, but you didn't hear what he said.
You mean back at the debate?
At the debate.
You didn't hear what he said.
You didn't hear what he said.
And he said, oh yeah, jackbooted baby murdering thugs, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Obviously, this is a prosecution based on political intent.
Yep.
There's no doubt about that. They've essentially admitted it themselves with this action.
Well, it sounds kind of like thin-skinned butthurt.
Thin-skinned butthurt with a ton of power behind it.
Yeah, which isn't a good look on anybody, but that's been a complaint.
Especially
I've heard.
not people with guns that have them pointed at you.
Yeah. Now this isn't the first time I've heard something like this about the ATF, right? It's got that might makes right, and you will respect my authority.
Yes.
Right. It's got a little Cartman going on.
Yes.
They got to clean that out, I think. But
I would strongly agree with that. I mean, the fact that it's dangerous for you and me to be sitting here talking about the ATF and the fact that we may disagree with the ATF's actions tells you everything you need to know about the ATF.
Well, and that's been the lawfare, right? Because now we're talking about like with the stroke of a pen, there's gleeful, petty tyrants there who want to destroy our lives with all of that. And this is what I'm hoping we can get to the essence of. And I think that's why this case is so important, because it always begins with some nucleating fractal crystallization point where you go, okay, it's about the whole thing, but that's all contained in this case right here. Right. And so obviously the pendulum swings back and forth. And I think it's swung too far over to your point where we are sitting here worried on some level, like, if I say that, am I going to get in trouble? That means we're fearing the government, and it should be the other way around. The pendulum swings back. The government should fear that if they do something like that, they will lose their jobs, get prosecuted, and end up in jail themselves.
Right.
Right. So that's where we're talking about. We got to swing this thing back. Right.
I would agree with that completely.
Okay. So but does he actually, what happens? Does, pounds the table, says you didn't hear what he said.
Roger is convinced, based on legal advice, to plead guilty to this offense. And again, you'd think he'd get at best maybe a fine for that. No, he is sent away to federal prison for 10 months.
Club Fed, the one where you get to play tennis?
No,
not
Club
that
Fed.
one.
No, this was very much not Club Fed. I recommend anyone go to his website, rogerveer.com, and watch the video that he made about being tortured in federal prison.
Tortured.
Give you an example. So when he first arrives, you know, you're put in the highest possible security unit in the SHU until you have been vetted, your security has been assessed, what level you are. And after you've been processed out of the SHU, you're sent to, pick up your clothes, your pair of used boots. And at that point, he was told after he'd been given the boots for the first time and his clothes for the first time, he was sent to a counselor's office. And of course, a counselor is just a glorified name for another guard who's going to process you.
Mm-hmm.
And he was told to go into the office. And as he walks into the office, there's two guards in there, one sitting at a desk, and the other one jumps up and says, hold it. What are you doing coming in here? Stop, I need to search you. And, so of course, Roger stops and he's not expecting this. Yeah, he's just been told to walk into the room.
Mm-hmm.
He's done what he's told, and now he's, he's being treated like he's done something incredibly dangerous. So of course he stops. The guy goes to search him, and at this point, Roger thinks he might have seen something in the man's hand. What's he going to do? He's powerless in this moment, right? You're the inmate. He's the guard. And as the guy goes down to Roger's boots, which again, Roger's put these on for the first time 2 minutes ago, he pulls a magic trick and appears to pull a shank out of Roger's boot. And a shank is a sharpened piece of metal that can be used to hurt people. For those of you who haven't spent much time, much time around prisons or prison environments.
I should say stabbing device.
Yes. So this guy claims to have pulled a shank out of Roger's boot, and he's screaming at Roger, "You're going to be in here for 2 more years. You could have killed me with this." And Roger's never seen this thing before in his life. Of course he hasn't. He's just put these boots on for the first time. And so
wow,
this man is terrorizing him, and Roger starts crying because he's a 21-year-old. He's been taken away from his family. He's been taken away from his career. He's been taken away from everything he knows and loves. And this man is now, and it was hard enough to mentally accept 10 months in a cage. Just for a moment, pause and think about think about a cage you've seen a dog in a kennel. Think about any cage confined area you've ever seen. Now picture that being put in a horrible environment that's loud, filled with dangerous people. And now imagine sitting in that metal box for 10 months.
As a 21-year-old.
10 months doesn't sound long, but it's really long when you're sitting in a metal cage. And so he had already taken so much to accept that he was going to have to sit there for 10 months. And now he's being told that based on this completely insane idea that he had a shank in his boot, they're going to add 2 more years to this for him. And so he starts crying. Why would he? Who wouldn't in that moment? Your life has already been destroyed, and now you're going to be looking at 2 more years. And after he's cried for a while, the guy just pats him on the shoulder and says, "I was kidding."
Oh, psych.
It's
a little psych moment there.
Total and utter psychopathy. That is what prison is like in this country. It's horrific. It's dangerous. It's soul crushing. It's mind crushing. Nobody who hasn't spent time around inmates on a regular basis or been inside has any idea what prisons are like in this country.
Right.
And so when he got out, he knew the ATF was likely not done with him. He knew the IRS was likely not done with him because he'd criticized them in that debate too. He had figured out by this point the U.S. was not a safe place for him to live. And so the very first day that he legally could leave the United States, he did. And that's, to me, is an indictment of our country. When somebody like this, a young man with a bright future ahead of him, who's an entrepreneur that's helped out so many other people by giving them jobs and been a net positive for our society, the only thing he did wrong was sell firecrackers on eBay.
Well, he said something that made a butt hurt for the ATF.
And that. But that we would chase someone like that out of our country? Like, what does that say about us as Americans?
Well, you saw the first part of this. Hey, come on in, all you unvetted migrants, including gang members, people who've been convicted of crimes in other countries, rapes, murders. Come on in. And they're welcomed with open arms by basically the same people who are committing lawfare against people who are, positives for this country.
Yes.
So I don't know how you could possibly design it so you could do more harm, right? But whatever their motive is, they've lost the plot line about what it means for them to be a productive member of this society. All right. So that's what we're up against in this case, right?
Exactly. And so he leaves the US, he moves to Japan. He thinks, maybe I'll be safe. Maybe I'll be safe in Japan. Turns out the ATF is not in Japan. So that's a start. And he begins to pursue finding an alternate citizenship, because as long as he is a citizen of the US, he feels he is not going to be safe.
Yep.
Until he has some other country that will stand behind him, he's not going to be safe.
Yep.
He tried to get a citizenship in Guatemala in around 2011. That didn't work out. But in 2014, he was able to get citizenship to St. Kitts and Nevis, which is a pair of these beautiful little islands down in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
A lot of freedom-minded people there. I think you've been there as well.
I have.
Great place. I love it. Anyway, so he goes down there, and he becomes a citizen of St. Kitts and Nevis, and at that point, he's ready to surrender, to renounce his U.S. citizenship. So in March of 2014, he goes to renounce. Now, the U.S., of course, is never going to let you go without taking their pound of flesh.
Of course not. Now we heard in the video we just watched that he has a moniker attached to him, which is Bitcoin Jesus. So before we go to the renunciation in 2014, what's it? Talk me through how do you get a moniker like Bitcoin Jesus? What's behind that? So in
Bitcoin, the white paper was published in December 2008, and Bitcoin was launched, I believe, in 2009. I forget which month. And in 2011, early 2011, Roger hears about Bitcoin for the first time. And to him, this was one of the most exciting concepts he's ever heard of, because finally here, for the first time ever, we have the opportunity for permissionless, private exchange between individuals, peer-to-peer, that the government cannot turn off, that they cannot inflate, that they cannot control. If in terms of human freedom and flourishing, this was one of the most exciting concepts in all of human history.
Well, and for people who understand money, and I talk about money a lot, money is a system of control, at least our system of money, right? It's debt-based money. It's loaned into existence. Actually, it's just printed willy-nilly into existence by the power brokers. But for you and me, it's very real and tangible. You run out of it, you end up under a bridge. Right. But for them, in the story, they just print whatever they need, bail themselves out, do all this and that. But it's a mechanism of control.
Absolutely.
And that's what we've learned about large totalitarian administrative state governments, is they like their control.
Yes.
And so I just want to keep that subcurrent of control as one of the key elements here.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because yes, Roger is at his heart a voluntarist. He wants people to have the right to do anything they want to do that doesn't hurt another human being. Why is this such a revolutionary concept? Why is this such a dangerous concept? It's dangerous because our government wants to control us. And so Bitcoin provided, for the very first time since gold, really, and in some ways, even better than gold because of its ability to be sent instantaneously across borders and for long distances. It provided the ability for us to permissionlessly, freely exchange with each other in a way that could not be turned off. And for Roger, with his viewpoint, this was one of the most exciting things he had ever heard. And so he's one of those people where when he buys in, he buys in.
All right.
When he's enthusiastic, he's enthusiastic.
Yep.
And so he immediately saw the potential, and he already owned several large businesses and decided to start accepting Bitcoin as payment for those businesses. He began to place ads on hundreds of radio stations all over this country through the Free Talk Live network, advertising Bitcoin, not his businesses, just advertising Bitcoin. And to get people excited, and he would speak at events, like he spoke at Pork Fest. I know you and I have both been there.
Right.
He'd speak all over the place at conferences, getting people excited about Bitcoin. But not just that. He would go into a barbershop, get his hair cut, and then he would say, I want to pay you in Bitcoin. He'd set up a wallet for them. He'd show them how to use it, and then he'd pay them in Bitcoin. And so he would go, he would give people Bitcoin. He would walk up to you and say, look, I want to give you some Bitcoin. Here's how to use it. And so he was known as Bitcoin Jesus because he was the primary evangelist for Bitcoin in the early movement.
Was he the guy who paid 10,000 Bitcoin for a pizza? Or was that somebody else?
That was the very first transaction. I believe Hal Finney was involved in that transaction. That was pre-Roger. I believe that would have been.
I remember that one. That one hit the news, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so for anyone who was around in the early crypto movement, everybody knew who he was. He was he was one of the primary people who was speaking for it, but it was also a gesture of generosity because he was giving of himself, giving of his own Bitcoins, and just handing them out to strangers, getting them on board. And so he didn't choose that moniker for himself.
Yeah.
Others chose it for him, but you could argue that it was an apt name.
Yeah. Now, today, Bitcoin, obviously, it's poking around $90,000 per Bitcoin right now. It's all over the news. It's gone through some changes, which I think is beyond the scope of this program, from peer-to-peer to digital gold. And there's a whole story around that. But I just want to set this up because 10 years ago in 2014, I remember, because I interviewed some people early on in Bitcoin and I tracked it for a bit, but it wasn't clear what was going on. It would go up to $100 and fall back to 20, and people like, that's it. It was, a bubble. It had all these things, but one thing that was clear, the SEC didn't know, is this an asset? Is it security? They had no point of view on that at that time.
Right.
The IRS didn't know what to do with it. These are just some of the things I vaguely remember. I'd have to look at the timeline again, but my perception is that in 2014, which we're going to return to now, it was a really kind of a murky area.
It was incredibly murky. Literally nobody knew what Bitcoin was. Is it a currency? Is it a security? Is it an asset? Who knows? Nobody knows.
Is it nothing at all?
Is it nothing at all? Is it a trash system of, what we would now call like a meme coin, right?
Yeah.
What is it? Nobody knew. The SEC didn't know. The IRS didn't know. How on God's green earth was Roger supposed to know what it was? But he has to suddenly figure it out. So you got to figure, in 2014, nobody's paying taxes on Bitcoin, like almost nobody. Roger is one of the only people who by that point was attempting to pay taxes on Bitcoin.
All right. So he decides look, he has a history that says, I don't want to be in this country anymore if I'm going to be treated this way. Totally fair. I get it. He decides to exit. There are rules, right?
Yes.
California's trying to make it hard to leave California. You don't break up with us, we break up with you kind of stuff, right? So the United States, the empire, it reaches its long noodly appendage across the world. But so he tries to leave, as far as I understand the story, as ethically and as openly as you can. So he doesn't just leave. He hires lawyers, accountants, like good firms, right?
He hires the top expatriation firm in the entire country. He hires an army of CPAs. He hires every possible expert you could possibly need to do this right. And then he instructs them, I need you to get this perfectly right. I know I'm going to be audited. I know the IRS is after me. So you need to get this perfectly right. And we know this is what he did because the motion to dismiss it's being filed, I believe, either today or tomorrow morning, but I encourage people to go look at it. It contains all the emails between him and his accountants and the CPA, between these firms, where Roger is saying over and over again, get this right. I need you to get this right. And there's this concept of attorney of reliance on counsel, because as well as I do, Chris, could either of us possibly memorize the U.S. tax code? I mean, it's a joke to even say it to anyone with any
70,000 pages? No.
Yeah, exactly.
Not going to happen.
I mean, I've got a pretty good memory. That's beyond me. I don't think there's a single attorney that hasn't memorized. Each one is highly specialized. So how on earth are we as individuals supposed to comply? The only way is that we have the right to hire people and depend on their advice. It's called reliance on counsel. And the IRS and the DOJ are trying to use this case against Roger to destroy our right to rely on counsel. And that's really dangerous to all Americans, because if you can destroy our right to rely on counsel, all of us are criminals immediately.
Listen, this is something they do every April. You can read it like usually in Forbes or something, and they'll take like a fairly simple tax return, say yours, and they give it to 4 major preparers, H&R Block, right? You give it to them, and they'll come up with 4 completely different answers.
Right.
Now, should any one of those or all 4 of those actually land you in prison because it was wrong, when even professionals can't get it right because the government's created a system that nobody can get right, because there is no right answer, right?
Exactly.
There is none. The best you can do is to rely on counsel and expert advice.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I built a big building and there's architects and the architectural plans have been reviewed and there's structural engineers, and then something happens, was that on me to not, be able to calculate the deflection angle of a beam on the 13th floor, right? Is that you have to rely on experts when you get to something that complicated.
Correct.
Right.
Especially exit taxes on a complex system where you're literally the first person in history trying to figure out how to pay exit tax at this level on cryptocurrency.
So first person to pay actually exit tax on Bitcoin. So he does that 2014. Then what happens? 2015, 16.
So it took a couple
17.
years to file it because it was so incredibly complicated. But there was, like I said, no clarity. And by the way, a little side note, the US government knows all of this because they have all the emails that he exchanged with his counsel. How do they have those emails? Because they violated his attorney-client privilege too.
But I mean, we're hearing about it now. It's 2024. I'm just trying to so he files, he exfils in 2014. Like, isn't that the moment when the government should say, hey, we don't like this. This looks wrong?
You'd think so. You'd think so. If this was so egregious, if this was a crime that deserved 109 years in prison.
109 years?
109 years.
That's what he's facing?
He's facing 109 years in prison. He's in his mid-40s. That's the rest of his life, and then half of another lifetime.
Well, but when did they actually decide to come after him? And
I suspect they've
why?
wanted him all along. I suspect they've wanted him down. They've wanted to take him down all along. But they bided their time. They played games of, we want to negotiate with you. Let's have your lawyers talk to us. Let's we can come to a settlement here.
Yeah.
When they were he was acting in good faith. His attorneys were acting in good faith. The IRS and the DOJ were acting in total and complete bad faith at all times in this process.
But when did they chart? When did this 109 years pop up?
April 26th of 2024.
Okay, so he leaves.
Or I'm sorry, I think the indictment was filed earlier, but he was arrested. And the indictment was secretly filed earlier, probably just before the statute of limitations.
Indictments. That makes me feel better right there.
Aren't those your favorite? They're incredibly American and not remotely Soviet.
Yeah, totally not Soviet. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a secret indictment against him, and then he was arrested on April 26th of this year.
Of 2024, though.
Yes. Well, I mean, this is a very dangerous and serious crime he committed. Obviously, let's wait 10 years to have any enforcement.
And just so everybody's familiar, the subject, what are the actual charges? Like
tax evasion.
Tax evasion. Okay.
Tax evasion and mail fraud. And you know what the mail fraud is for?
Okay, interesting.
Mail fraud,
they love that one.
It's their favorite, right?
Yeah.
What do you think the mail fraud's for, Chris?
He must have sent something to a lawyer or something. Or
he mailed his taxes.
Oh, he mailed his taxes. Mail fraud.
It's so ridiculous on its surface.
All right, I have to ask now, can we name names? This isn't like the government. This is something, whoever filed these charges has a name. Who's doing this?
I don't know if I know the name of the exact agent responsible. But I'm sure in most of these cases, there are one or two people who have taken, a personal offense.
Yeah. Okay.
And I would not be at all surprised if that's the case here as well.
All right. So 2014, he's like expert counsel, the best expat law firm out there. We're going to do this, and CPAs, lots of communications back and forth. So I just want to turn to this now, because this is a really great article. I mean, really great summary of this case that Aaron Day wrote in for the Brownstone Institute. And it's why Roger Ver deserves a presidential pardon. I really want to turn, Tracy, to what's at stake here. And let me just continue reading for now. I'll sign in later. So this is pretty important right here, because there's some good things that could happen from this, and why Trump must act. I liked all of this, but if this doesn't happen, what's going to happen is, where did I put this? What are the stakes? There's a lot at stake on this. Let me find it here. Oh yeah. This dangerous precedent, right? If this stands, Robert Barnes has warned, who I know you work with, we've entered a world where seeking legal advice becomes evidence of guilt. What does that mean? Right there.
Seeking legal advice becomes evidence of guilt.
Yeah. What is that?
If you email your attorney to ask them a question.
Yeah.
And then the government raids your attorney's office. They
can't do that though.
IRS agents with guns raid your attorney's office and take a ton of documents they have no right to. This is what happened in Roger's case. His lawyer's office, his CPA's office, and his office were all raided at the same time by armed federal agents.
I'm struggling. That doesn't happen. That happens?
It did in this case.
The lawyer. So, but again, we talked about that lawfare part, right? Like that's really designed to send us a flare up to all the other lawyers out there, isn't it?
It
You
is.
touch this case, and you're going to have armed thugs. Sorry,
Taking down your
apparently they're
door.
sensitive to that. Armed federal agents,
Yes.
not wearing jack boots, just regular boots, are going to beat down your door and take your stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're going to take attorney-client privilege documents,
Mm-hmm.
which they will then use against you, and they will use against your client.
Whoa.
I mean,
That's
if
really
this isn't the
astonishing.
evidence of a state gone rogue, what is? If this isn't the evidence of an agency gone rogue, what is? If this isn't evidence of our government completely losing its mind, what is?
Communications with counsel used as evidence. No, and they can't compel you to testify against your spouse, right? These are things that were just sort of like sacrosanct in the legal code. Who rewrote this? Like, when did this change? I don't
Excellent
understand.
question. Well, it certainly changed for Roger. So he's now in a position, he's now in this position where they have raided his attorney's office, stolen all of those sacred attorney-client privilege communications, and now intend to use them against him.
But if this was like the only way I could sort of like nudge myself towards this position is if they said there's a terrorist, like this is the TV series 24. He's got a nuclear bomb, right? And so we're going to have to raid his attorney's office because it's that important. You're telling me that some guy who expat in 2014, they are willing to upend literally one of the most sacred pieces of our legal structure. So this is just like not termites. This is sledgehammering.
This is sledgehammer to the foundation of our legal system. If we don't have the right to private communication with our attorneys, we have nothing.
Right.
We have nothing. We have nothing but standing between us and tyranny if we lose that right. This case is huge for every American, and this is what the U.S. government does not want you to know.
So it turns out that, no safe way to seek legal advice. People, you're going to have to seek back alley legal advice, right? This is
That's the direction this is heading.
Coat hangers is terrible. It's just very unsafe way to practice business. But due process, retroactive criminalization of legal conduct.
There were no clear rules in 2014 on how to approach your taxes. Roger and his attorneys were left flying blind, not instrument rated pilots, right?
I hate
figuring this out.
This drives me nuts, this one, because this is one of the worst things you can do is take a typical law-abiding person and then pass a rule, which has the power of law, and then they get in trouble for that retroactively.
Correct.
Right? So they could pass a new rule at the Department of Fashion that bell bottoms and jeans are now illegal, and anybody who has any of those in their closet is now a felon.
Yet in Roger's case, it was even more egregious than that. Imagine today, you and I go to file our taxes. We follow the IRS's current instructions to the best of our ability. 5 years from now, they change the rules around how you pay taxes on something. Let's say, let's say they reclassify how one has to pay taxes on gold, or let's say they go forward with the unrealized gains tax. Now, Chris, you are going to be penalized because you didn't pay unrealized gains in 2024 for the rule we made in 2030. That's essentially what they're doing here, because there was no clarity. There was no clarity at all on how to handle Bitcoin.
You can't do that.
Well, you shouldn't be able to do that, but we're not operating from law. We're operating from power here.
Right. Control and power. You respect my authority.
Cartman's always great.
No clear standard. Well, no, I mean, this one, I just can't get past this one because this is Banana Republic stuff right here. This is really bad. You can't just go ahead and do something like that without, I submit to you, completely undermining the entirety of the edifice of law, right? So yes. Law is this careful thing, and it's humans having to interact across a distance with trust, and it's not perfect, but it's better than no law. And it started with the Magna Carta, and it's kind of come forward over hundreds of years of development, and now they're just going to overturn like big pillars of it.
Yeah.
Because why, right? And again, can anybody articulate what the clear and compelling danger is if they didn't like shatter all these pillars of law for this one case? What is it about this case, you think, that really, because it's not about the actual details of the case.
Right.
This must be that it represents a threat to an ideology or a narrative structure or something like that. Because we can't explain it in terms of obviously details.
No, you can't. This case is not about taxes.
Mm-hmm.
To understand what this case is about, go back to the year 2000. Go back to the 21-year-old young man standing on a debate stage saying that the IRS, is a criminal organization, that taxation is theft, and that the ATF are jackbooted child murdering thugs. Go back there, and that's where you find the root of this case, because it turns out, even though they cruelly punished Roger for saying those things, he wasn't done speaking his mind. He's continued to do so. Over the years since then, he has spoken out strongly in favor of freedom. He's spoken out in favor of human flourishing. He's spoken out about ending poverty. He's spoken out about permissionless financial systems like Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
He's spoken out against war. He's spoken out against the deep state. He's spoken out against the surveillance state. He's spoken out against censorship, against vaccine mandates, against all of these things. This is why he is dangerous, because not only is he speaking out against these things, he's funding the resistance. And he's been funding that resistance quietly, and very few people know about it. But the government does know.
Mm-hmm.
And they know that if they can take down this one man who is funding so many things, so many of these movements will be weaker. And that's what this case is about.
Well, I'm really hopeful that the environment has changed at this point, because this past election, I have a very simple way of looking at it. People were voting against more bullshit.
Yes.
Like, we're all done. Like, you could vote for more, but we're voting against more of that because we're tired of it, right?
Yeah.
Words don't mean anything. Genders don't mean anything. Men are better at being women than women. Endless wars, and meanwhile, when you look around our country, Tracy, it's embarrassing. If you go to any major city and look at the homeless population, which has exploded, these are Americans, and we're not helping ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We're wasting money on frivolous cases like this to defend an ideology that, frankly, doesn't make people's lives better. Arguably does not improve lives.
I completely agree. The government could be spending, if you're going to have a government and it's going to be spending money on things, you could sure do a lot better than persecuting this man.
Yeah. Well, now let's look at this. No clear evidence standards for compliance. I get that, but good faith efforts used as evidence of guilt. What is that referring to there?
They have all his emails.
Mm-hmm.
They have everything he sent. So of course, they have every tiny piece of personal information about his finances and everything else that he submitted privately to his attorneys. And this is the best part about it, Chris. I've seen those emails. They're all going to be in the motion to dismiss tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
They don't show guilt. They show innocence. They show a man who is doing his utmost to comply because he knows the state hates him. Mm-hmm. Why on earth would he not try to comply perfectly when he knows he's going to be audited?
But the prosecutors are trying to claim that they show something different than that, right?
In the indictment, and this is how you know how bad faith they are. In the indictment, they took tiny pieces of each email.
Oh no, you can't do that.
They left out everything exculpatory. They left out everything that showed how well he was going to comply, and then they flat out lied. They lied through their teeth. They lied and said that he was intentionally hiding things from his attorney. The only person hiding anything here is the DOJ. They are the only ones hiding anything because they're the ones cutting it out of the emails.
You can't do that.
You shouldn't be able to. And again, we're not operating from law here. We're operating from power.
Mm-hmm. Now, it does create a constitutional crisis here. So we have the right to counsel. When following legal advice becomes criminal, I don't even know what to do with that. That's so far off. That is so far off the reservation of how this all works. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but when you have defense counsel and you are guilty of murder, you can just say anything you want to your counsel and tell them exactly what happened, and they will still defend you, and nobody can pry that out of them because they have attorney-client privilege, right? That has been the system.
Correct.
How can it become criminalized?
Well, That's a great question. How can it become criminalized? Well, when you steal someone's confidential documents that you have no right to, and then, these documents, by the way, show that, if you go read the motion to dismiss, Roger's even saying, like, maybe we should just transfer the assets from my company to me, and then I'll pay a higher tax rate on it, just, to make sure I avoid audit. And his counsel is saying, no, you don't need to do that. Like, they're owned by your company. Like, you shouldn't have to pay a higher rate just because you think the IRS is going to come after you. And so he follows their advice, and he's being penalized for that now. This is a world turned on its head. This is a legal system turned upside down.
Yeah.
This is lawfare, pure and simple.
So what's the play here? What's the ask? I saw Aaron was writing a presidential pardon that could clear this up. And I think that would be a good start. I would be in big favor of having a presidential pardon. I want more than that. I want reform out of this. I want this not to happen again.
Yes.
Right. So what's the request here?
Well, step one is, everybody, please go to freerogernow.org. It's going to take less than 60 seconds of your time. Please sign the open letter there to President Trump asking for Roger to be pardoned. You don't have to live in the United States to sign this. You don't have to put your personal information on, like you do on so many of these things. I think the only thing required really is your email address and maybe your name, but you don't have to, you don't have to share all your personal information, but please go sign it. We need to show the groundswell of support, because if you care about human freedom, if you care about the anti-lockdown movement, or medical freedom, or Julian Assange, or Ross Ulbricht, or any of these things, if you care about the anti-war movement, you've benefited from Roger's work. You just don't know it yet. And so it's worth 60 seconds of your time to help save Roger spending 109 years in a cage. Please go to freerogernow.org and sign the petition. So that is step one, because we need to show President Trump that we have support and that the people want this. That's step one. But I agree with you. After a pardon, step two is making sure this never happens to anyone else again, that the individuals responsible for this are held accountable, and that the agencies responsible for this are completely reformed, so that this lawfare against American citizens and American non-citizens too, right? In the case of Roger, that it has to end. And it has to end now.
This is Roger Ver, and the request here is link that again, please. That website.
It's freerogernow.org.
All right. Excellent. All right. So, but yeah, so much is at stake on this.
Yes.
And hopefully we've hit it's either the zenith or the nadir, depending on you look at it, of this lawfare junk, right?
I truly hope so.
It really got institutionalized. It became endemic. It just became a thing you did till people could get on the podium and talk glibly about like ruining lives with the stroke of a pen. That power of the state that certain people are attracted to, and not the best people, by the way.
No.
Some of the worst of the worst. These are people you really don't even want to have like a DMV pantsuit, managerial position.
And you certainly don't want them babysitting your kids.
You do not. You do not. So we got to clear this all out. But I'm hopeful that now we can. And I think it begins, as I mentioned, with this fractal nature of like, if we can't get this one right, we're not going to get the rest right. I mean, I honestly think one of the biggest errors made in everything was for the journalists out there, so-called, to whiff on Julian Assange.
Absolutely.
Like they shot themselves in both feet, right? Because you've revealed yourself to be a hypocrite and to have no integrity, but also not to fundamentally understand what your own business is actually about at its core.
Correct.
Which is freedom of speech.
Right.
This is a core issue here again.
This is absolutely a core issue, and it's one that every American should care about. Anyone subject in any way to the U.S. tax system should care about. Anyone who ever intends to hire an attorney ever for anything in their entire life should care about. And anyone who cares about any of these freedom movements should care about, because, you look at Ross Ulbricht, who, thank God Trump has promised him a pardon. Ross was one of the main people funding Roger was one of the main people funding Ross's legal defense too.
Yep. I'm having a request here, which is, can you spell out that URL? Google appears to be blocking. FREEROGERNOW.org. Maybe that's it. Let us know if that works for you or not, because we really don't want that to be blocked. But pro tip, Don't use Google anymore. They're part of the beast.
This is true.
You know, Brave is good.
You're speaking my language here, Chris.
Yeah. Yeah, just you know, I get it, but just editorially, Google returns terrible search results. It's almost useless.
Oh,
I have an
absolutely.
incredible memory for things, and I know I can search almost perfect keywords, and nothing shows up in certain things. And then I go over to Brave and I find it right away.
Absolutely. I mean, they're
Happens over and
burning
over
the
again.
digital library of Alexandria. There's no
They
question.
They absolutely are. All right. Well, that is the time that we have today for the Signal Hour. This is a very special Signal Hour. So, Tracy, thank you so much for being here today. I really support your cause here, and really thank you for what you're doing.
Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure. And everyone out there, again, please take 60 seconds of your time to go to freerogernow.org and sign the petition. Share your posts on X, show your support, and we thank you so much for everything you do to help him.
Yeah, and I'm just going to put it up there right now. Somebody typed it out for us, NOGL. Thank you. Really appreciate it. freerogernow.org. Is that it? Looks
That
right.
is it.
Looks right to me.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks very much for that. And thanks, everybody, for being here today. And thank you for your attendance here today. Signal Hour every Wednesday, 1:00 Eastern, and I will be going through things. This was a very special program because we need to get this done now for Roger and for all of us to live in a free world, which we can all feel in our heart of hearts is coming back, and it feels good. I got to confess, if this election had gone the other way, I think I would have also been exploring expat options potentially, right? Because I can't live under tyranny. I just can't.
Nope.
I just don't want to. I have no interest in living under.
Nope. Live free or die.
Live free or die. There it is. So with that, thank you very much, everybody. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.